Welcome to Sisters for Financial Independence, or Sisters for FI for short. In this month's roundtable, October, we are chatting with my sisters, or part of the inspiration, and the people who helped me start Sisters for Financial Independence. My sister Anna and my other sister, Elaine. And in today's roundtable, we are going to cover the following topics. Now, we'll have a conversation about some of these topics. We'll have some rapid fire questions concerning topics that has come into our lives that relates to money, maybe something that relates to our careers, so that we have a conversation about money and get the perspective from different people. We are all at different ages, different stages of life. And so hopefully this provides a perspective on what to expect, or how you can view money from a different lens. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself briefly? And then we'll move on to Elaine.
Sure. I'm Anna. I am 39 years old. I'm married with a child. My husband and I and my son, Rocco, live in South Jersey. I am a practicing accountant. I have been for 17 years now, almost 18. I work from home in my own business, but previously I was on the corporate side. But after my son, as he grows older, I wanted to be closer to home. So that's why I started my own practice.
Hi, I'm Elaine. I'm 27. I am single. I am an architectural designer in the transit industry based out of New York City. So I do live in North Jersey. So I guess my perspective will come from the opposite end, not in a family, in my 20s, spending money, doing all those things.
Great. Thank you so much. So as you can see, we are also all Filipinos, and October is Filipino American History Month. Now, the Filipino American History Month was designated by Congress after years of advocacy by individuals and organizations back in 2009. But I have to be honest that I did not know there was a Filipino American History Month until very recently, in the past few years. Social media, I think, was a big part of this movement to push Filipino American History Month, and I'm very happy that it is. But for me, I'm still kind of getting used to getting news about Filipinos, seeing all of these posts about Filipino American History Month. Did you know there was a Filipino American History Month? When did you find out? When did you realize there was one?
I honestly didn't really hear that much about it until recently. So if I did, it was probably in passing. I think we were probably the first one to fully bring it up and call attention to it.
Yeah. What about you, Elaine?
Probably also very recently, maybe only the past 2 or 3 years. I probably never really noticed until I saw it on like Instagram or something like that.
Were you in any kind of Filipino groups in college or post-college? Because I know where we grew up, there was Filipinos, but there wasn't a good amount. And I don't think our parents pushed us to do a lot of cultural events. So, and I remember going to a few Filipino events in college, but not necessarily joining those kinds of groups or clubs.
Same for me. There was an Asian American Association club or organization by college, but I didn't commit to actually join it. I kind of dabbled on the sidelines.
What about you, Elaine?
My college definitely had a large Filipino population, and there was a Filipino club. I did not partake in said club, but I did know if there were events going on or this and that. But my roommate in college was Filipino. I don't think she was fully involved with that, but she did go to some events, so I would kind of absorb information from her. But I also wasn't really part of the clubs either.
So I think for me too, I think one of the reasons why Filipino American History Month is kind of becoming more important for me is that I do have a daughter who is half Filipino. So a part of me wants to instill in her some of our culture, some of our language, so that she has that as she grows up. Anna, is that something that you're looking to do with Rocco, or how are you managing that kind of duality, I guess, in a sense of making sure he has cultural background, living in America, and also his other cultural background, like mixing all of that up?
Yeah, I definitely want to be able to instill some of the Filipino culture into Rocco, because growing up, he's going to be able to hopefully identify with his Filipino roots, and as he gets older, I want him to be connected. I know my husband is 5th generation Italian, so he's like so far removed from it. But since we just immigrated from, it was over 30 years ago, but we have enough ties to the Philippines now that we can connect our children with the people there. So hopefully we are that bond that kind of continues through history instead of kind of breaking off at this point.
That's true. So when I was 9 when we left the Philippines. So for me, growing up is a little bit different because I still had half of my brain. I kind of still had the memories of what it was like to grow up in the Philippines, what it was grow up in a different world, different culture, different language. And Elaine, you were born here, grew up here. Did you feel like you were Filipina? Did you have that sense of I'm different or I'm the same? What was it like growing up for you?
Yeah, so I'm first gen American. As you said, like my sisters were born in the Philippines, so I do feel like there's this whole other life and history that I'm inadvertently connected to, even though I never was born there or grew up there. And even our parents now are currently back in the Philippines with the rest of our family, so there's still a lot of connections. Growing up, there were some Asians in school. I had like one Filipino classmate in elementary school, but she moved back to the Philippines. I feel like it wasn't until middle and high school that I was like, oh, I'm Filipino, but I kind of embraced it more largely, just connecting with like other Asians, I guess. So I feel like it wasn't really until recent years that I felt more, oh, all these like Filipino things. There's actually a Facebook group or a couple of Facebook groups called Subtle Asian Traits and Subtle Filipino Traits that I've been part of for maybe 5 or 6 years now. And that's been really interesting to see posts that are there because you realize that some of these experiences growing up aren't isolating. They're actually like a collective shared experience. So I think it's great to see, my niece and nephew, Alexis and Rocco, as they're growing up, maybe they'll be more in tune and picking up on these little things that are kind of unique to our experience growing up.
What about you, Anna? What was it kind of like growing up as I guess it's so for me, I was like, I did not necessarily see myself as a Filipina in America or as a Filipino American. So what about you?
Yeah, I think growing up, it was a little bit of an odd transition because I felt a little bit different. Just coming into like a different culture, different lifestyle altogether in America. I don't think I really truly connected to being or kind of reaching down to like the Philippine roots until I was more grown up. Probably, I would say during my college years, because I think growing up, there's a feeling of wanting to assimilate and belong to the American culture. So, you watch all the TV shows and you get into all the different things that the other kids are involved with. So it wasn't fully instilled in us to kind of keep that Filipino tradition fully alive, per se. Like we still went to Filipinos parties. And so that kind of lives in my, my brain has kind of like a Filipino identifier. But other than that, there wasn't like any other kind of connections to individual like Filipino part per se.
I think that's kind of a similar experience probably for a lot of people, especially I think in the old like the early years before social media. There wasn't a lot of representation, especially on traditional or your TV media. So I definitely love that social media is pushing a lot of cultures out, so we get to know them. We also get to experience them, and it's kind of normalized a little bit. So let's move to Filipinos and money. Now, I know that part of the reason why I wanted to start Sisters for Fi was to start the conversation about money, whether it was Filipinos, whether it was women, whether it was girls like us who are growing up and kind of making our own income, but not knowing what to do with it. Do you remember any kind of money conversations we had at home growing up, or any type of maybe Filipino type of money stereotypes that you remember seeing, or just kind of like, was that something we had or not?
In terms of conversations, I don't really remember having full-blown conversations about money, but our mom was very money conscious, whether that meant we were budgeting or she was cutting coupons. She did keep like a book, she'd write everything out. She would watch the closing bell every day if she was home from work. She would watch TV or money-related TV sometimes, and so that was always kind of in the background, which I don't think not a lot of people always experience. So our mom was always kind of attentive to that.
Yeah. Anna, do you have any other memories or things that were kind of like unique to our Filipino household, or do we have money conversations that you remember?
I don't know if it's unique to being Filipino, but I'll echo what Elaine was saying. Our mom was very money conscious, and just based on like the shows that she would watch, Susie Orman, she would have that on. As a kid, if your mom is watching that, then you kind of listen in and pick some of that stuff up too. So I think she worried about money. And
did you feel it? Did you feel it that she was worried about it, or did it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys did.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Because I remember, because she paid for I know for my tuition for college. And what she would do is give me a check each semester to give to the bursar office. And she would like call me to follow up. Did you drop it off? Did you drop it off? It hasn't cleared yet. Make sure you drop it off. And I just remember that she was like very conscious of that, because I know that she was working so hard to make sure that she was paying out of pocket for it, and not putting at least me at that point into a lot of student loan debt.
Yeah, I think especially while you and I were in school. So Kat and I are only a year apart. So imagine having to pay for two educations at the same time. I think it's, for any parent, that can be a little bit stressful, especially because my mom was also the sole breadwinner. So at that point, as Elaine was younger, my dad was a stay-at-home dad, taking care of the household, making sure Elaine got to and from school. So I think there was definitely like some stressful moments where I felt like my mom's, her handling of money kind of may have been was a heavy burden on her.
I agree with that. I think that's something that I think looking back, I didn't really take into account. Like I took that for granted, that there was a lot on her plate and she was managing a lot. Well, both of our parents were kind of managing a lot, three kids, and kind of in a place that was also like where the costs were increasing and they had to send two kids to college at the same time.
And I think to add on to the Filipino aspect of it, everybody in the Philippines, once you're in the US, they expect that you're living comfortably, and they kind of expect things to, I don't know if they expect it, but there's usually you send like a bulk buying box, and that kind of means that people have money, but they're still struggling in certain ways to make the tuition payments for two daughters, and then raising another one at home. So it's not as smooth as everybody thinks. Like, you come here to America and you've made it, but you still have to live out your life. You still have to pay the bills. You still have to pay the mortgage, and worry about retirement and all this stuff.
I think people realize that the cost of living in the US is fairly high. Yeah, the dollar to maybe peso is pretty good in terms of conversion, but even right now, rent alone, some of your other costs are fairly high in comparison. So that's definitely something that I think it's important to just point out, that yes, you can be living in America. I'm not trying to dismiss like other people living around the world, but yes, there's the idea that if you are in America, that you are so doing well off that you can come home to the Philippines anytime. And for me, that was also my thing, was like, why can't we go to the Philippines as often? And as I am trying to calculate us to go back to the Philippines, I'm thinking that now my parents were like, well, three kids plus two adults is a lot of money, a lot in flight tickets. And that's something that I just, of course, for me, like I'm learning that as I also have a daughter, and now trying to figure out like what kind of flights we're figuring out as far as where to go. Well, there's two things I distinctly remember though from our house, that our mom always had money magazines in the bathroom, which is which is something that was like I didn't understand yet when I was like reading those magazines what the topics were, what were they talking about, but they were there. So that exposure alone, I think, was good in terms of just getting our brain. I don't know if any of you read those magazines while you were in the bathroom, but they were just like just get your brains thinking about like these other topics. And the other thing that I know is kind of specific to Filipino culture is this baon culture, which is like where you actually, if you go to a party or you go somewhere, you bring home something back. You bring home maybe leftovers. You bring home things that that was not eaten, and the host will readily give it to you. They're like, please bring some home. And I think that's part of also like our culture, where we want to share. We want to open our doors to other people, which can be good, but also bad, right? Because I'm sure you might be doing extra just to have extra to give to other people. So I don't know if that's something that you've thought about, or if you're kind of doing extra just to give to other people.
I mean, literally in terms of food, I threw like a housewarming last year, and I had a lot of my friends over, and I had catered some Filipino food, in addition to some other foods that I had, and I had prepared like dishes so people could take home. I was like, oh, I have all this extra Tupperware. I'm not going to finish all this food.
Mhm.
People can take it home. And then some of my friends who weren't Filipino, or they're not kind of used to that part of the culture, they weren't expecting that from like a house party. So I was like, no, 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 take more food. And they're like, no, no. I'm like, oh, but I know you live with your sister. Take some for your sister. Like, it didn't matter to me. And they were like, oh, okay. So they
Yeah.
were like surprised about that.
Any other thoughts on Filipino and money, maybe now as you're getting older, or anything else that has come up for you?
You mentioned going to the Philippines and like, taking our trips there.
Hmm.
So I've been lucky enough that I've been to the Philippines a handful of times in my life. So I'm 27. I've been 5 times. Um, I'm going for my sixth time this January. So Anna and I are going to be going to the Philippines to visit our parents and family. But this is my first time that I'm actually paying for things. So you do realize, oh, this is really expensive. And that like my parents were able to, pay it off for me all those other times that I've been. Because it is a lot, to fly all the way over
Right.
there and to cover all those costs.
It's I think as you each year, like each time you go, I think it becomes a different experience. Like you take on, I think, different things, especially too now that in this scenario for you, you're using your own money. You're using what you've earned to get you the things that you want. So yeah, I'm curious to see what the experience will be like for you once you go. Since we've covered all that, now let's move on to some rapid fire questions or basically topics that I just want to cover that's kind of been in our periphery. I think either we're dealing with it, maybe some of our friends are dealing with it. So I want to just have a discussion on that to see where you stand with it. You have any thoughts on it? What is your advice or suggestion for those that are kind of going through either a event or working towards this area in their financial life? So let's start with student loan repayment, which just restarted. I think many people should have gotten their letter in the mail saying that student loan repayment has started for themselves. That means if you have federal loans, they are no longer in forbearance. It's now time to pay back.
I paid off my loan, so I'm kind of I don't have. I think I paid it off 10 years at this point. I had originally a 10-year payback period when I graduated college, and I just chipped away, just added in some extra funds wherever I had, just so it wouldn't be on my plate anymore. If you can manage that, that's what I would suggest, just so you don't have to think about it and you can move on to other savings goals.
So I'm still paying off my student loans. So I did graduate in 2019 with about 30K in debt. They were a combination of federal loans as well as private loans to pay off my last couple of years of school, as well as a grad program that I did. So initially, I was paying off both, doing what I could, and then the pandemic happened. So all of my federal loans were on pause. Because I still had private loans, I decided to tackle those instead. Luckily, I had a job that was secure enough that I wasn't really worried about, where I was like spending money. So I was able to kind of still pay off and even pay more aggressively my private loan, which was about maybe a little over 16 or 17K. So I was actually able to pay that off completely over the pandemic. So I was able to actually chip away at that, pay it off completely. And then now that federal loans are back in, I kind of have to rebudget that in. And again, trying to pay off a little more than just the minimum, obviously, to, get more out of it out of the way. So hopefully I can pay it all off sooner.
Do you have any peers that are also managing their student loans now? How are they dealing with now having to pay back?
Some of it's a mix. So some people are just minimum payments, doing what they can with money they have. Some people only had federal loans. So some people were like putting that money away and saving it until another day. And so as soon as it kicked back in, they actually paid it off completely in one go.
Okay, that's a good
Half month or two. I had a few friends that were just like, all right, I'm saying goodbye to however many thousands of dollars because they were able to save that over the past couple of years. And I think it varies between my friends in terms of how they're paying off their student loans.
Yeah. Has there anyone considering or reconsidering going to grad school or taking on student loans, given that the rates are high?
Right now, no. I would say maybe a couple years ago, there were a few people that were considering grad school, and they had probably started right before the pandemic. So they kind of also were dealing with, oh, well, now I'm in school, but now it's virtual, and they're kind of dealing with, well, what am I paying for?
Right.
Situation.
Okay. All right. So I think for us, I know my husband still has some student loans from his grad school that we're paying off, and it's been okay. It's kind of interesting to also at the point in our life where we're paying for his loans, but also saving for my daughter's kind of college education, like this duality that happens when you're in a different stage in your life. All right, so let's move on to enrollment period. Enrollment period is usually the time frame in your office or at work where you can enroll in new benefits. Now, at Sisters for Fi, I absolutely love talking about work benefits because we can take advantage of so many benefits at work, which can either save you money, save taxes, or allow you to increase your salary. Your benefits are part of your compensation. So if you are not taking advantage of them, you're basically leaving money on the table. So I want to cover enrollment period for a little bit and see if it applies to any of you. I don't have enrollment period because I work for myself. My husband's enrollment period passed already. But what are your thoughts on enrollment period? What advice would you give to someone who is either doing this for the first time because they're at their new job, or they have just moved on to a different life stage? What do you want to say to them when it comes to enrollment period?
I would say definitely ask questions to HR or whatever resources are given to you. There's usually a lot of different options, whether it's commuter funds, FSA, dependent care FSA. I would just take a look see if you can kind of assess where you are going to be in the next year and see if there's any benefit to making certain elections. Like for us, since we have a 3-year-old that goes to daycare, we're going to take advantage of the dependent care FSA. Or if you have like a medical treatment that you want done, I had LASIK done a couple of years ago. That's something I budgeted in for FSA, and that was partially funded from those funds. So items like that, I would definitely kind of account for. The enrollment period for these benefits are relatively strict, so make sure you mark it on your calendar. Don't be late. It's usually for like a month or so. So just make sure you do it in a timely manner.
Did you ever discuss benefits with your coworkers, Anna, when you were at work at some point? Was that something that was like common to do or acceptable to do?
Not so much with my coworkers. I've discussed it with my husband, just because some things are personal. Like if we knew, we were going to have a baby or something, we would kind of choose the best option for insurance. That way we wouldn't have to pay out of pocket so much. I know the premiums would have been a lot more, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't worrying about it, if there was like going to be a big bill, if we deliver the baby, at that point.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that. It's something that's super important too. Like as you're thinking about next year, especially when it comes to a life change or a big event change, like having a baby, make sure you consider that, because if you've been in the workforce for a long time and you've been single for a long time, you may not be thinking about all these other benefits, right? You don't know anything about the dependent care FSA or using FSA for other things. So just keep that in mind, that it might be good for you to just revisit all of those other benefits that you didn't think about when you were single or maybe no kids at that point.
I work in a very corporate setting. I work in a very large engineering firm. So we do have enrollment period starting soon. We actually got an email this week. I'm still new to the whole corporate world. So I think in the past couple of years, it was definitely helpful to reach out to HR, or sometimes they have, a couple of webinars set up. So making sure I add that to my calendar to check in on what's new or what's different or what something is. But even talking to my sisters, because they've been through it. I'm like, what is this? What is that? Is it worth doing this? So that's always important. In terms of if I've ever spoken with my coworkers about it, sometimes with my younger coworkers, just because we're all kind of in the same boat, similar lifestyles, similar expectations with our health or what we're spending on. So it's like, oh, well, which health plan did you do? Or, oh, do you have an HSA, or are you spending it on things? Like those kinds of conversations. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely been helpful, having colleagues that are open to talk about our enrollment period as well.
Yeah, I think it's also the other point that I also want to emphasize is that sometimes if you are not familiar with it, like you did not come from a family that had these benefits, you might not be aware or be confident enough to know what to sign up for. And attending those webinars, those lunch and learns can provide you that insight. And I don't think, I would just don't be shy of asking questions, because again, this is part of your compensation. If you don't enroll in some of these, you are basically losing out on money, which can increase your wealth, increase your investments, and so forth. We do have another video where we discussed specific benefits that you can look out for in your employee benefits in your enrollment period. So I will link that as well in the description and somewhere up here so you can take a look. And that again comes from a different perspective of what you can sign up for, so you're prepared.
I'll definitely take a look at not only your enrollment site, but actually your employee handbook, and kind of just comparing information, because sometimes I feel like some things are obvious, or sometimes there's added benefits that you don't realize. So I think it's worth looking at both.
Mm-hmm. Great point. I think sometimes, especially when we're just getting started, we're so gung-ho to start and not look at the handbook or the benefits package and not signing up for those. So yeah, it's a good point. Okay, let's move on to Bachelorette budgeting. Now, I know Elaine just came back from both a bachelorette party or weekend as well as a shower, right?
Yeah, there was a shower maybe a month or two ago, and that same friend just had her bachelorette this past weekend. So that's why it's kind of a topical topic right now. Mm-hmm. So we actually went to Atlantic City. I've only been once before, so this was kind of like a new experience again, especially since the last time I went, I was underage. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience and a little more expensive than I thought.
How so? Like, what were you expecting? Or how were the costs shared so you could budget? How did you do that?
So some of the planning was a little last minute due to some other external circumstances. But in terms of some unexpected expenses that occurred, one would be, I think, one or two extra. My friend has a lot of bridesmaids, or a lot of people in her bridal party. And so one or two extra bridesmaids ended up coming to the weekend that the people that were planning weren't anticipating. And so we only had 2 hotel rooms booked. And then last minute, one girl was like, well, we're not going to all fit in one room, or like, there's no reason for us to be squished in 2 rooms. So we booked an extra room for the whole group. Another thing was just dinner was very expensive. And then, of course, we're also like covering the cost of the bride herself. And so that also covers a little more money than expected. We didn't gamble, so I didn't lose any money in that respect. But just like things like that kind of add up. And like we were driving down, so we bought extra snacks. Maybe we bought some extra cake for like the hotel room and alcohol and things like that.
So how are you saving for things like this? Are you just like putting like a separate, I don't know, like party budget or bachelorette budget when it comes to these kinds of events? I mean, I guess I guess sometimes it depends, because sometimes at one point all of your friends start getting married, so it becomes a lot. How are you budgeting that now, and how are you making sure that you can say yes without putting yourself in a financial predicament?
Yeah, so in terms of budgeting for any other future bachelorettes, I'm not entirely sure yet. So my friend that is just having all of her things now is my first in my main friend group to be going through this process. So right now I'm kind of willing to spend more money because she's like my best friend. This is my first one. She sent out a Google form many months ago, actually, when she was kind of initially planning it, and she was going to send that to her maid of honor to help, facilitate. But she'd actually asked everyone, was like, what's everyone's budget? What are people willing to go to? Are people willing to stay overnight? How many nights? Those types of things. So that was also kind of nice to know that she was kind of taking into consideration everyone's budget. What kind of activities could we do? Trying to see the vibe that everyone was trying to expect out of the weekend, and setting everyone's expectations for it.
Were there people in your group that were honest about like, hey, I can't afford this? Or were there other people that said, let's put more? How did you resolve that in, like, I think you said this is a large group.
So she is a large bridal party, not only just in the quantity of people, but it's also a lot of variety in terms of ages. So she has some people that are a little bit older, and then she also has some people that are younger. So there's also that consideration of maybe someone older is not really in their party phase anymore, so they're not necessarily going to spend money going out. Some people in her party are also underage, so they actually can't spend money on those things. So there was kind of some consideration on how we wanted to split up the events for this bachelorette, which this is a unique experience, which not most people aren't going to have. But in this case, we kind of had one day was kind of dedicated to more of the events you would expect out of a bachelorette: going out, dancing, having drinks. And then the other part was kind of a more calmer experience. We did like a brunch. We kind of did karaoke. Everyone could kind of partake in that, but that was not as expensive for people as well. So we had some people opt out of the first night, and they only came for the second part.
Okay, so it's a good option at least to have. Would you invite us to your bachelorette party when it happens? No. Wow.
I would maybe have like a
low-key one
or something that everyone would come to, but no.
Wow. And Anna, do you remember bachelorette budgeting?
Not in the traditional sense of like a bachelorette party. It's been a couple of years since I've been to a bachelorette party. But I remember the one that we did go together with. We went to a friend's bachelorette party in Miami. The people that organized it, the bride's best friend and the bride's sister, I remember them being super communicative, very forthcoming about what the budget was, how much each item was, like from getting your hair done to the dinner to the hotel to the flight. I love that they took care of everything, and all I did was just like give the money.
show up.
They had planned the whole weekend. The bride had an amazing time, and they set forth expectations from the get-go, and I thought that was wonderful. Just because you can't really, like, if you do it halfway, but you kind of are wishy-washy about it, I feel like it leaves a lot of uncertainty where people may be able to back out, or if they're not sure if they'll be able to make it. So expectation from the very beginning, and see who can make it or not.
Yeah, I agree. That was like a really fun bachelor party because it was so planned and well thought out. But you didn't have to worry about money. You didn't like worry about what you're going to order because you might have to pay for it after, because they collected the money beforehand. They provided you basically like itemized expenses of what we were buying. So that was amazing. I do recall that we went to your bachelorette party, Anna, in Vegas, and you were basically the first one in the circle to get married. So I definitely overspent on that party. Partly because one, you were my sister, two, you were the first to get married in that circle, and this was like many years ago. But I do remember that I had a roommate too, and your old roommate. We put a lot into like, let's make sure we have a good time. Let's make sure we do that. And I think there's something that you have to kind of manage too, that you definitely want to have a good time, especially since it's your friends and you want to have a memorable event, but you do have to just be careful about finances and how to manage that in a way that still can allow you to have fun, but not go into any type of credit card debt or any type of negative financial situation.
Have you ever passed on a bachelorette or had to like have a private conversation that your budget didn't meet a certain party?
I Not that I can think of. Not that I think of. I think one thing that was helpful for me though is to have like a separate savings account for just fun things. What I did in the past was just like not dip into, maybe like reduce the fun things over the year so that I could have more funds in that bucket and then be able to use that for a larger event. I think that's something that might be helpful for someone who is trying to make sure they have the funds to do a larger stuff, is to start putting in smaller amounts and smaller amounts of money into a fund. All right, so now let's move on to savings accounts. So right now, the current interest rates for borrowing is very high, which also means the interest rates on savings accounts is high. Have either of you taken advantage of moving your money to a savings account that provides greater rates? Or what have you done anything with your money in the last year because of the high interest rates at this point?
Yeah, I've moved some money around. Capital One. I haven't looked at all the other banks, but Capital One is offering a pretty good savings rate. I think it's 4.3% at this point. They also have CDs at 5%. So we've been mainly using that bank along with another regional bank for our regular checking. But yeah, continuing to look at the interest rates to park our money where it's going to get the most interest.
Similarly, I moved some money around in my Capital One accounts.
Mm-hmm.
I had one or two savings accounts in Capital One, and then I opened up another account in Capital One, and that rate was actually better. So I kind of just shifted it over to the higher percentage.
Yeah, I think it's something that we if you are at a bank, if you have a savings account, just look at the savings rates for now and see if there is a way for you to get a higher rate. You might have to move it to a different account type. You might have to open a new account to take advantage of it, or you might have to shop around for rates, especially if you have just cash sitting around or money that you don't have any plans for in the next year. I think earning some interest on your money, getting some money over your money could be a good thing.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised how easy it was.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It is easy. How did you do it? Just online, right?
Yeah, online. And like, luckily, it was all within the same bank.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I went into it thinking, well, it's the same bank. Why would it be different? But then it's like, oh, if you do open another account, it could be a different rate entirely. So
yeah, and I think if you bank online, so if you work with an online account solely, their rates will be a little bit higher because they don't have the other costs of maybe maintaining like a brick, like their storefronts or places. So just just keep that in mind. Then you might be able to get a higher rate for an online only bank like Capital One or even Ally, or I think there's others like Marcus. So, and the last thing we'll cover today is savings goals for single individuals versus if you're married or with kids. What does that look like for you now? Like, what's a snapshot of what you're saving for now?
A little bit of travel, just trying to build up the savings rate that we have, putting some funds into retirement, and also putting some funds into 529. So all the classic, married and with kids stuff.
Same.
For myself, it's definitely travel. I think still building my emergency fund. I feel like I have a decent amount of months kind of built up, but I think I'd like a little more of a cushion, especially since I'm kind of spending more from my month to month. Another thing that I'm saving up for is I'm probably going to move next year. So I'm kind of anticipating the added costs that come with moving, whether it's a broker's fee or having money just to hire a mover or all those things that come with moving. And like, I rent, so there's always a lot of things going on for that.
Are you looking to save to buy, or at this point just rent?
It's hard to save to buy if I'm just trying to live
okay
month to month just to rent. So and I'm trying to pay off all those other things.
Have you started looking at just rental units? Like how are the rents in your area? How much are you budgeting for foreseeing that the increase will be?
Yeah, so I'm currently living in Jersey City, which is still in the New York City metropolitan area. And next year, I'm considering moving to New York. Not sure completely yet on that, but we'll see. So I do expect, a higher cost of living, even more than what's already here in North Jersey. So that I'm kind of anticipating another $300-400 at least to rent. But I think that also is dependent on the sacrifices on or what I'll decide on. If I can find a roommate, do I want a roommate again? Do I want to live alone? How far out from where I want do I want to live? Also, just like proximity to XYZ amenities, transit, my job, those types of things.
All a lot of things to consider before the big move happens. All right.
Mine's not that serious, but I was going to say I'm celebrating Filipino American History Month by drinking, is it going to load? Is it focused? Calamansi.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. I was actually going to ask, what's your drink of choice tonight? Maybe we'll do that in the next roundtable. Bring your drink of choice and we'll hold it up so that we'll see what we pick for our nightly drink. Did you have something to add, Anna?
I just wanted to touch back on the savings goals. Going back to a couple of years ago when my husband and I were still dinks, like dual income, no kids. We were both doing the New York commute from here in South Jersey. And we had the idea to live off one person's income. That way we could save the other person's income. And I thought that was very beneficial because at some point my husband decided to part ways with his company. So he was able to, that transition was a lot easier to manage financially with just having me work in the city and my husband kind of built up a real estate investment business because we were kind of already practicing it for, a year, 2 years previously. So just something to keep in mind. I know it's like a higher, savings rate than the standard 10 and 20% that they usually recommend. But I think if you can do it, I would say do it that way. You can get your savings rate up and then get closer to financial independence.
Good point. Yeah, I think so if you're not familiar with FIRE, Financial Independence Retire Early, part of the tenets of FIRE is to increase your savings rate. And when you increase your savings rate, it means you have more in investments, which could be making more money for you, more in just cash on hand, or more in a cushion for yourself. So that should something happen, or should you decide that, hey, I want to pull back on work, then you still have money to live on. You are not really aching for needing funds. So I think that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. That's definitely something that, if you're considering that, or if you're considering, it does require a lifestyle change. I want to say that when you're dual income to living off of one income, it does change the way you live, change the way you interact, but there is a forward benefit, right? I would say.
It just kind of prepares you, I think, better financially for the future.
Great. Before we wrap up, I also just want to share some of the Filipino books we've been reading at home. Now, these are children's books, so if you have children at home and want to instill in them Filipino culture, Filipino food, Filipino language like Tagalog or Bisaya, check out these books out, and I'll also link those in the description. Good. All right, so I think that wraps up our October Sisters for Fi Roundtable. We will have a November one. Maybe we'll try to have a November one. So if there is a specific topic you want us to discuss and get our points of view and perspective on, let us know in the comments and we will bring it up so you can get our perspective. Again, we are Sisters for Financial Independence, or Sisters for Fi for short. I'm Catherine.
Nana.
And I'm Elaine.
Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you at the next roundtable. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.